My sister walked down the aisle before me at my wedding and announced, "Everyone should know the prettier sister wears white too." She was wearing the exact same wedding dress I'd tried on at the boutique 3 months ago, but decided was too expensive. The one I'd sent her a picture of saying I wished I could afford it. Except she'd added a longer train and a crown that made her 3 inches taller than me. My guests turned in their chairs to watch her walk down the aisle that was supposed to be for me in 10 minutes while the wedding march played on the speakers. "What are you doing?" I grabbed her arm as she passed the room where I was waiting with my bridesmaids, but she shook me off and kept walking toward my groom Adam, who was standing at the altar looking confused. "I'm making an entrance. You always said the most important part of a wedding is the entrance." She spread the train of her dress across the entire aisle so no one could walk past her. My wedding planner was frantically trying to stop the music, but my sister had given the DJ $500 to keep playing no matter what happened. "That's my dress. The one I wanted." "How did you even know?" I followed her down the aisle in my actual wedding dress, which suddenly felt cheap compared to hers. "You left your browser open at Mom's house. I saw you'd favorited it, so I bought it. It was on sale for $8,000, which is nothing for someone who actually has a successful career unlike you." She did a slow turn at the altar, making sure the photographer got every angle. Adam tried to step away, but she grabbed his arm. "We need comparison photos so everyone can see who wears it better." My mother was sitting in the front row taking pictures with her phone. "Mom, tell her to change. She can't wear white to my wedding." But my mother just shrugged. "Rebecca looks stunning. You should be happy for your sister. She never gets to dress up like this since she's too successful to date." Rebecca smiled at the crowd of 200 guests we'd invited. "Since I'm already up here, I should explain why I deserve to wear white more than the bride. I'm 32, and I've saved myself for marriage, unlike my sister who's been living with Adam for 2 years. White represents purity, and I'm actually pure." My aunt gasped from the third row. Several of Adam's relatives started whispering. "You told everyone we weren't living together," Adam whispered to me, looking panicked. "My grandmother thinks you're a virgin." Rebecca heard him and laughed into the microphone she'd grabbed from the officiant. "She's not, but I am. So technically I'm the only one here who should be wearing white according to tradition. Plus this dress costs 4 times what she paid for hers, which means I'm honoring the institution of marriage more through financial investment." She pulled out her phone and showed the receipt to the crowd. $8,000 for the dress. $2,000 for the alterations to make sure it fit better than hers would have. $500 for the crown because queens deserve crowns. And $3,000 for these shoes that make me taller than the groom, which proves height. Doesn't matter when you have confidence. My bridesmaids were trying to pull me back to the changing room, but I couldn't move. Adam's mother stood up from her seat. "This is inappropriate. You need to leave." Rebecca turned to face her with this sweet smile that I knew meant she was about to say something horrible. "I'm sorry, but who are you?" "Oh right, the mother-in-law who won't even have the prettiest daughter-in-law in the family photos. How sad for you. But don't worry, I'll be in all the pictures to make up for it." She positioned herself next to Adam and called the photographer over. "We need some shots of what this wedding could have looked like with an upgrade." The photographer looked at me helplessly, but Rebecca pulled out a checkbook. "I'll pay you triple to take photos of me with the groom. Think of it as practice for when I get married to someone even better than him." Adam stepped away from her. "This is insane. Someone call security." But Rebecca had thought of that too. "I already paid security to take a long lunch break. I also paid the catering staff to serve the cocktail hour early so people would be drinking and relaxed for my entrance. Oh, and I paid the band to play my favorite songs during the reception instead of your basic playlist." She walked over to where I was standing, frozen in my dress. "You chose the venue, the date, the guest list, and the groom. The least you can do is let me have the dress since I actually have the body for it. Look how it hangs on me versus how yours would have looked." She stood next to me, forcing a comparison. "See? Same height, but I fill it out better. My trainer says I have perfect proportions for a mermaid silhouette. You're more of an A-line body type. It's not an insult, just genetics." My dad finally stood up from his chair where he'd been sitting silently. "Rebecca, that's enough. Go change." My dad's face turned red in a way I hadn't seen since I was 16, and came home 3 hours past curfew. He moved fast for someone who usually avoided conflict, stepping between Rebecca and Adam with his hands clenched at his sides. Rebecca stopped mid-pose with her phone still held up for another selfie. My dad pointed toward the exit with one shaking finger and his voice came out low and hard. He told her she had exactly 2 minutes to leave the venue or he would remove her himself. The steel in his tone made even Rebecca pause, her smile faltering for the first time since she'd walked down my aisle. She lowered her phone slowly and looked at our mother like she was waiting for backup. My mother stood up from her front row seat so fast her purse fell to the floor. She grabbed my dad's arm with both hands and her voice came out in a harsh whisper that somehow carried across the ceremony space. She said he was overreacting and making things worse, that Rebecca was just having fun and he was embarrassing the whole family more than Rebecca had. 200 guests sat frozen in their chairs watching my parents argue while pretending not to watch. Rebecca moved to stand behind her bouquet, which matched mine exactly down to the white roses and baby's breath. She had this smirk on her face like she was enjoying watching our parents fight over her. My dad shook off my mother's hands and his voice got louder when he said that Rebecca had sabotaged my wedding on purpose, and she needed to leave now. My mother's face went tight and she said fine. If he was going to be unreasonable, then she would handle this herself. She turned to the guests and announced in her fake cheerful voice that there had been a small misunderstanding, but everything was fine. Adam grabbed my hand hard enough that I felt his fingers pressing into my palm. He pulled me toward the side exit without saying anything to anyone, just moving fast like he needed to get out right that second. His parents stood up from their seats looking confused and upset, following us without asking questions. I stumbled in my heels trying to keep up with Adam while my dress tangled around my legs. The realization hit me like cold water that the cohabitation lie was about to explode on top of everything else Rebecca had done. We made it to the hallway outside the ceremony space, and I could still hear my mother's voice explaining something to the guests. Adam kept walking toward the parking lot, but then stopped suddenly when someone called his name. Estelle, the wedding planner, appeared from around the corner, moving fast in her practical flats. She had her phone in one hand and her clipboard in the other, and her face looked genuinely sorry in a way that made my throat tight. She said she had already called the venue manager about getting our deposit back since Rebecca's interference made it impossible to continue the ceremony. Her voice was gentle when she added that she had worked weddings for 12 years and never seen anything like what just happened. She promised to handle the vendors and make sure we got refunds wherever possible. The kindness in her tone made me want to cry more than anything else that had happened today. Adam thanked her in this flat voice that didn't sound like him at all, then kept pulling me down the hallway. His parents caught up to us, and his mother Michaela asked where we were going. Adam said we needed somewhere private to figure things out, and Estelle directed us to the bridal suite on the second floor. We climbed the stairs in silence except for the sound of my dress rustling and Adam's mother's heels clicking on the hardwood. Elliot and Ainsley must have seen us leave because they appeared in the hallway and followed us without asking. We ended up crowded into the bridal suite with Adam's parents standing by the window, and Elliot and Ainsley near the door like they were guarding it. I could hear noise from downstairs where the ceremony space was, voices and movement that meant the chaos was still continuing. Adam sat down on the white couch and put his head in his hands. His mother stayed standing, and her voice was quiet but firm when she asked if Adam and I had been living together. The question hung in the air for what felt like forever. Adam lifted his head and looked at his mother, and the defeat in his eyes made my stomach drop. He said yes in a voice barely louder than a whisper. His father, Nathaniel, made this sound like air leaving a tire. Michaela's face went pale, and she sat down hard in the chair by the makeup mirror. She said they had driven 6 hours and spent thousands on travel and hotel for a wedding built on lies. I watched Adam physically shrink under his father's disappointment, his shoulders curling forward like he was trying to make himself smaller. Nathaniel said they had talked to their church friends about the wedding and bragged about how their son was doing things the right way. I tried to explain that we lied because we knew his religious family wouldn't approve of us living together before marriage. The words sounded hollow even to me as I said them. Michaela looked at me, and the hurt in her voice cut deeper than anger would have. She asked why we didn't just tell the truth if we were going to do what we wanted anyway. I didn't have a good answer for that. The door burst open and my mother came in without knocking, with Rebecca trailing behind her still in that expensive white dress. My mother announced in her bright fake voice that Rebecca had graciously agreed to change clothes, so we could proceed with the ceremony. Rebecca was holding her phone up recording everything, panning across the room to capture everyone's faces. She smiled at the camera and said something about documenting the drama for her followers. Elliot moved faster than I'd ever seen him move, and planted himself directly in front of the door. He told my mother in language I'd never heard him use that nobody wanted them here, and they needed to leave right now. Ainsley didn't say anything but started gathering my personal items from around the suite, shoving my street clothes and shoes into my bag with quick, angry movements. Adam's mother stood up and said they were going back to their hotel. Nathaniel agreed and added that they needed time to process everything that had happened. Michaela wouldn't look at me when she said they would decide tomorrow whether they were staying in town for any rescheduled ceremony. The coldness in her tone felt worse than if she had yelled. My father appeared in the doorway without my mother, and his voice was quiet when he said he would handle getting our vendor payments back and dealing with the venue. He still wouldn't meet my eyes when he apologized, and something about the familiar pattern of it made everything suddenly clear. He had been apologizing for Rebecca my entire life without ever actually stopping her from doing anything. Elliot helped me gather my things from the bridal suite, while Ainsley folded my veil and packed my shoes into the bag I'd brought that morning. Nobody spoke except to ask where I'd left my phone or if I needed my makeup bag. Adam stood by the door watching the hallway to make sure my mother and Rebecca didn't come back. His jaw was tight, and I could see him checking his phone every few seconds, probably reading messages from his family. We walked out through the back entrance of the venue to avoid the guests who were still milling around in confusion. Some of them called out asking what was happening, but Elliot just kept walking, and I followed him because I couldn't form words to explain. The parking lot felt too bright after being inside, and I had to squint against the sun that seemed wrong for how terrible everything was. Elliot opened the passenger door of his car and waited while I climbed in, still wearing my wedding dress that now felt like a costume. Adam got in the back seat and pulled the door shut hard enough that the whole car shook. Ainsley's car pulled up behind us, and she flashed her headlights to show she was ready to follow. The drive to our apartment took 20 minutes, and nobody said anything the entire time. Elliot kept his eyes on the road and his hands at 10 and 2 like he was taking a driving test. I watched the streets pass by and saw people walking dogs and pushing strollers and living normal Saturday afternoons that didn't include ruined weddings. Adam's breathing was loud in the quiet car, and I could feel tension coming off him in waves that made my chest hurt. When we pulled into our apartment complex, Elliot parked close to the door and turned off the engine but didn't move to get out. Ainsley parked next to us and came over carrying my bag and the garment bag with my street clothes I'd planned to change into after the reception. We all went upstairs together like a sad parade, and I fumbled with my keys because my hands were shaking. Our apartment looked exactly the same as when we'd left it that morning, which felt impossible. The coffee mugs from breakfast were still in the sink, and Adam's tie that he decided not to wear was draped over the back of a chair. Ainsley set my bags down by the door and hugged me without saying anything. Elliot stood in the middle of our living room looking uncomfortable like he didn't know what to do with his hands. Adam went straight to the bedroom and closed the door, and I heard him making phone calls in a low, urgent voice. Ainsley asked if I wanted her to stay, but I shook my head, because I needed to be alone with Adam to figure out what happened to us. She hugged me again and whispered that she'd call tomorrow, and then she and Elliot left together. I stood in the living room still wearing my wedding dress and listened to Adam's voice through the bedroom door. He was talking to his mother, and I could hear the stress in his tone even though I couldn't make out the words. When he finally came out, his eyes were red, and he looked exhausted in a way I'd never seen before. We ended up on the couch still in our wedding clothes because changing felt like admitting something I wasn't ready to admit. Adam put his arm around me, and I leaned against him and cried while he stayed silent and tense. His body felt different from usual, like every muscle was tight and ready for something bad to happen. I could feel his heart beating fast through his dress shirt and knew he was dealing with his own crisis, about his family finding out we'd been lying. We stayed like that for hours while the sun went down and the apartment got dark around us. Neither of us got up to turn on lights or change clothes or eat dinner. Adam held me, but it felt mechanical, like he was going through motions instead of really being present. I kept replaying the whole disaster in my head, seeing Rebecca in that dress and my mother taking pictures and the guests whispering about us living together. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Rebecca's smile when she grabbed the microphone and told 200 people I wasn't pure enough for White. Adam's phone kept buzzing with messages, but he ignored it and eventually turned it face down on the coffee table. My phone was somewhere in my bag by the door, and I didn't have the energy to go get it. We finally fell asleep on the couch around 3 in the morning, still fully dressed with the TV playing some late-night show neither of us was watching. When I woke up the next morning, my dress was wrinkled and uncomfortable, and my makeup was smeared all over Adam's shirt. He was already awake staring at the ceiling, and I could tell he'd been up for a while. I sat up slowly, and everything hurt like I'd been in a fight. Adam's phone was in his hand, and he was scrolling through something with a grim expression. My bag was still by the door where Ainsley had left it, and I made myself get up to find my phone. The screen lit up with 63 notifications, and I felt sick before I even started reading them. Text messages from aunts and cousins and friends asking what happened and if I was okay. Voicemails from relatives I barely knew wanting details about the drama. A group text from my mother with my aunts and grandmother, where she said I was being dramatic and making Rebecca feel bad for trying to participate in my special day. My mother's message said I needed to apologize to Rebecca for ruining her moment and making her feel unwelcome at a family event. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly that my mother thought I owed Rebecca an apology. There were more messages from my mother directly saying I was overreacting and Rebecca just wanted to feel included since she never got attention for being successful. I turned my phone completely off and threw it back in my bag. Adam was watching me from the couch and asked if I was okay, which was such a stupid question I almost laughed. His phone rang and he looked at the screen and then at me before answering. I could hear his mother's voice on the other end asking him to meet for lunch and saying they needed to talk. Adam agreed and said he'd be there in an hour and hung up. He told me his parents wanted to meet with just him, and I nodded because I understood they needed to process everything without me there. He went to take a shower and change, and I stayed on the couch in my wedding dress because I couldn't make myself move. Adam came out dressed in jeans and a t-shirt and kissed my forehead before leaving. The apartment felt too quiet after he left, and I finally changed out of my dress into sweatpants and one of Adam's hoodies. I tried to watch TV but couldn't focus on anything. I tried to read, but the words didn't make sense. I ended up just sitting on the couch staring at the wall and thinking about how this was supposed to be my wedding day. Adam came back 3 hours later looking worse than when he'd left. His face was pale, and he had this exhausted, defeated look that scared me. He sat down next to me and said his parents were really hurt about us lying to them about living together. They'd told all their church friends we were doing things the right way, and now they felt embarrassed and deceived. But more than that, they were worried about my family's dysfunction and whether Adam was making a mistake marrying into it. His mother had asked if this kind of drama was going to be normal, and if Rebecca always caused problems. His father wanted to know if my mother always enabled bad behavior and dismissed my feelings. Adam said they needed time to think about whether they could support our marriage given what they'd witnessed. I felt physically sick hearing that I might lose Adam because of Rebecca and my mother. My stomach cramped and I had to run to the bathroom where I threw up even though I hadn't eaten anything since yesterday morning. When I came back, Adam was sitting with his head in his hands, looking miserable. I realized his parents had a point that I'd been making excuses for my family for years. I'd normalized my mother's favoritism and Rebecca's need to compete with me, and my father's inability to stand up to either of them. Adam's family was showing me from an outside perspective just how messed up my normal really was. The patterns I'd accepted my whole life suddenly looked different through their eyes, and I felt ashamed that I'd brought Adam into this toxic mess. Elliot showed up around 6 with bags of Chinese food and made us eat even though neither of us wanted to. He sat at our kitchen table and said he'd known my family was messed up since college when he first met them, but watching Rebecca sabotage my wedding was beyond anything he'd imagined possible. He asked how anyone could be that cruel to their own sister, and I didn't have an answer. Elliot stayed for an hour making sure we ate and then left, saying he'd check on us tomorrow. Ainsley arrived right after Elliot left, carrying a bottle of wine and her laptop. She sat up on our coffee table and pulled up a social media page I didn't recognize at first. Then I saw Rebecca's face and realized she'd posted a video. The title said, "When You're the Better Sister," and it already had 8,000 views. Ainsley warned us it was bad before she pressed play. Rebecca appeared on screen in that expensive white dress sitting in what looked like her apartment. She smiled at the camera and started talking about how she wore white to her